would like to thank Amy Lamb, Susan Engelstein, and LVSC for putting together this program. It's very chaotic in my world in immigration right now, and I'm sure that there are a lot of people out there that also have questions about what's going on, how does the process work. So I'm really excited to put this together for you guys and LVSC. I also would like to introduce Karen Ledesma, who's on the call, on the Zoom call tonight. She's one of my paralegals, and she's going to help me run the slideshow. And so we'll get started. So Karen, you want to share your screen, please? Okay, great. So I'm going to talk about basics of Immigration 101. How does the U.S. immigration system work? This is a very broad topic because there are very specific aspects to immigration. So I'm going to do my best to give you an overview of the various different immigration categories, processes, and what maybe, some of your students or friends, people in the community might be going through. So next slide, please, Karen. So before we get started, I would like to just give you a little bit of background about myself. As Amy mentioned, I've been licensed since 2001. Since then, my primary focus has been immigration law. That's really all we do. I'm a partner at NPZ Law Group. We have 5 attorneys and we have about 20 paralegals. We have an office in Raritan, an office in Ridgewood, and an office in Florida, and all we do is immigration. I went to Seton Hall undergrad, went to Rutgers Law School in Newark. I am a member of the of AILA, the American Immigration Lawyers Association. I'm also a member of the New Jersey State Bar, Somerset County Bar. And I'm proudly a member of the Literacy Volunteer of Somerset County, a board member. I'm also vice chair of the Somerset County Business Partnership. And I know that the partnership also has nonprofits that are members. So hopefully some of you guys are on the call as well. I'm also one of 40 commissioners that was appointed by Governor Murphy in February of 2024 on the New Jersey India Commission. So I'm really proud of that as well. And lastly, I'd like to just mention that I'm an immigrant myself. I was not born in the US. I was born in India, and my family immigrated to the US when I was 5 years old. And so I became a citizen automatically when my parents naturalized. I think I was like 11 or 12 years old. And I've been a resident of Somerset County for over 20 years, and I am bilingual. I speak English and Gujarati. So that's a little bit about me. Next slide, please, Karen. So I like to start with just some statistics in terms of the immigrant population within New Jersey. So this data is from the American Immigration Council, and this is going back to 2023. But if you can see here that there are, actually I have to zoom in, but a large number of immigrants in the state of New Jersey. And what does that mean? That means some people may have lawful status, some people may have no status. And so today I'm going to go over with you, what does it mean to be in status and out of status? What options do you have? Okay, so next slide, please. All right, so there are some key government agencies that play a crucial role in the immigration world. Okay, we have the Department of Homeland Security. Within that, we have USCIS, which is the Immigration Service. Basically, they adjudicate immigration applications. You might be familiar with the naturalization application that's processed by USCIS. We also have ICE, U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and they enforce immigration laws within the U.S., including detention, and removal. We also have CBP, which is part of Department of Homeland Security. And CBP basically oversees the inspection and admission of people that are arriving in the US, whether it be, at the airports, at the land border crossings, seaports even. That's all handled by CBP. Then we have the Department of State, and the Department of State issues visas through the embassies and consulates worldwide. So they process immigrant visas, they process the diversity visa lottery, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Then we have the Department of Justice, and that's where the immigration court system is housed. It's under the Executive Office for Immigration Review, and this is the court system. New Jersey has two courts. We have a court in Newark, and we have a court in Elizabeth. Also under the Department of Justice, we have the Board of Immigration Appeals, and this board reviews the decisions by the immigration judges. Okay, next slide, please. So I also wanted to give you just an overview of some of the key documents that you might see in the immigration world. So of course, we have a US passport. Many of you may have that if you traveled internationally. Then we have the permanent resident card, which is the green card. Next, we have a US visa. This is a document that is basically stamped in a foreign national's passport that allows them to enter the US. There's also this employment authorization card. It looks very similar to a green card, except it's a different color. And this card basically is your authorization to work. Then we have the I-94, which is a record of your entry. When a foreign national enters the US, there is a record of that entry, and you can retrieve that record from the CBP website. And this basically details how this person entered the country, in what status did they enter, and how much time are they able to remain in the US. And then finally, what I also have on here is the certificate of naturalization. You may be familiar with that if you, if you're tutoring and you're help people file for naturalization. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so the immigration laws are found in the INA, the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1952. That's when it was enacted. And the INA says that it basically defines the world in terms of people who are US citizens and then everyone else. Okay, so everyone else is called an alien under the INA. Immigration attorneys like to use foreign nationals or foreign citizens. So in terms of a US citizen, the 14th Amendment says that anyone born in the US is a US citizen. You can also be a US citizen through naturalization. You can acquire citizenship if you're under 18 and your parents naturalized, which is what happened to me. Also, if you give birth to a child outside the US, that child is still considered a US citizen, okay? Then we have everyone else. And everyone else is divided into many different groups, depending on their status in the US. That includes immigrants, LPRs, which are lawful permanent residents. It also includes temporary visa holders. These are non-immigrants. It also includes various individuals who may have protected status, like TPS. Maybe they have DACA or they applied for asylum. And everyone else also includes people who are out of status or undocumented. And it's important to note that everyone that's in this right side of this slide can be removed from the US. So even if you have a green card, you can still be deported from the US if you commit certain crime, okay? So that really, I wanted to just lay out how the immigration law defines people in the US. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so let's talk a little bit about, why are people coming to the US, right? So, people are interested in coming to the US for a variety of reasons. We have non-immigrants who are coming temporarily. They might be coming to go on vacation. They might be coming to study in the US, to go to school. They might be coming to visit family and friends. They also could be coming in as an athlete or an entertainer, coming to the US for performance. So there are a variety of visa categories that allow people to come into the US, but they have a very specific purpose and they each have a very unique requirement in order to be approved for that type of visa. And most of these visa categories are what we call non-immigrant intent visas. This means that when the individual is applying for this visa category, they have to demonstrate that they're going to go back home to their home country. So for example, when you have somebody that wants to visit the US, to visit family or friends, they're going to be applying for a B1, B2 visa. When they apply for that visa at the US consulate in their home country, they have to not only explain why they're coming to the US, but also be able to demonstrate that they're going to go back to their home country, that they have a job, they have strong ties. And if they're not able to prove that, they're not given the visa. Okay, so we have this category of non-immigrant visa holders. Then we have immigrant visa holders. And these individuals are coming to the US with the intent to immigrate, meaning, live and work in the US permanently. And, for those people, again, they're coming maybe to get married to their fiance for better quality of life, family reunification, because they may have parents that are in the US, spouse or children in the US. But these individuals basically are on a path to immigrate to the US, okay? And depending on how long the process takes, they can either process in the US or process outside the country, okay? But all of the sponsorship categories do require a sponsor. And I'm going to talk to you about, what categories are eligible for sponsorship. And then you have people that are coming to the US for humanitarian reasons because they're seeking protections from the US government. Maybe they want to claim asylum. Maybe they're coming in as a refugee, or they're already in the US and they're applying for TPS, temporary protected status. Or maybe they've been paroled in the US, okay? And if you are entering based on some of these humanitarian grounds, it could lead to permanent residency, okay? And I'll talk about which options lead to that. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, I put this slide in just to give you an idea of all of the various types of non-immigrant visa categories. So, as I mentioned, you could be coming to the US to visit friends. I also highlighted on here F1, that's a student visa. We have a lot of international students in the US. And in order for them to enter the country, they first have to apply for an F1 student visa, okay? I also highlighted H-1B. H-1B is a very common employment professional work visa. And so again, that's a visa that they obtain outside the US before they can come and work in this H-1B category. I also highlighted P1. Again, if you're an athlete coming to play, coming to play soccer, they're going to be coming on a P1. Okay. Next slide, please. All right. Well, this is where the fun stuff starts now. So, people are coming to the US for a lot of different reasons, but, maybe some people entered without inspection. Okay. So I'm going to talk about what is an undocumented immigrant, or what does it mean if you're out of status? And why do people cross the border? So a lot of times people are coming here for better opportunities, Or they tried to come the legal way and they were refused a visa. So maybe they have no alternatives but to enter the country without inspection. Okay, so undocumented immigrant and out of status, sometimes they sound similar, sometimes they're used interchangeably, but there is a difference. So an undocumented immigrant means that you're living in the US without legal authorization. And there's two ways that could happen. Basically, somebody enters the US without inspection. We call them EWIs, EWI, entered without inspection. Basically, you cross the border. Okay, so this happens when you don't go through an actual designated port of entry. So you weren't formally inspected and admitted into the US. So you don't have an I-94 record of your entry. It could also happen if you overstay your visa. Many people do enter the country legally with a visa, but if they remain beyond their I-94, then they're considered undocumented. Okay. Then we have people who are out of status. It means somebody who entered the US legally, but they lost their status or they fell out of status by violating their visa. So for example, we have maybe a student who entered on an F1, and part of the F1 visa requirement is that you have to be enrolled in full-time school, like a full-time, credit each semester. And if you don't do that, or you no longer are going to classes, right? Now you're out of status. So that's what happens if you enter legally, but then you violate your visa status. And unfortunately for both of these categories, undocumented and out of status, you are at risk for being deported if you come to the attention of the immigration authorities. Okay. Next slide, please. So for those that are undocumented or out of status, are there any options? People always ask. Well, the process to get legal is extremely challenging. Once you fall out of status, you really cannot get back in status. You can only do that if you've maintained your status. So for example, if you enter the country on a tourist visa, you're going to be given 6 months to visit. During that time, if you decide, hey, I want to go to school and you want to file for a change of status, as long as you do that within your 6 months, you're fine. But if you try to do that after your 6 months, now you're out of status and you can't go back in status. And so for these people, the pathway to become legal is very challenging. If it's possible through family sponsorship or employment sponsorship, most of the time they're going to need a waiver. And the problem with the waiver is that you need a qualifying relative who is going to suffer extreme hardship. And typically these people are not going to have qualifying relatives because a qualifying relative is a US citizen or a green card holder, spouse or parent. Children don't count. So most people are not even going to apply, not even going to qualify for a waiver. That's why it's extremely challenging for individuals who are in the US out of status or undocumented to get back in status. Okay. And these individuals also are not authorized to work, okay, unless they're eligible for some form of relief. So if they entered the country and they applied for asylum, let's say, okay, applying for asylum does allow you work authorization while your asylum case is pending. Okay, so if you have a valid work authorization, now you're authorized to work. Now, even if an individual is not authorized, but they are working, it is recommended that you file taxes, okay? And you can do that by obtaining an ITIN, okay? ITIN. And it's interesting that the IRS doesn't care if you're legally authorized to work. They're interested in making sure you pay taxes if you are working. So again, if you're legally authorized to work, absolutely file tax returns. Even if you're not authorized to work and you're working, still file a tax return, okay? Individuals who are undocumented or out of status, unfortunately, they're not eligible for most benefits, okay? Unless there are emergency benefits, like if you need to go to the, emergency room or something. But other than that, they're really not entitled to any benefits. Now, it is possible for people who are undocumented or out of status to get a green card through marriage, okay, if they are married to a US citizen and it's a bona fide relationship, okay? But only if you entered the US legally. So if you entered the US on a tourist visa, even years ago, let's say somebody came in 5 years ago with a tourist visa and they never left the country, okay? And then they marry a US citizen, they are able to process their green card because they are considered an immediate relative, okay? But again, only if you entered legally and it is a bona fide marriage. Another very important thing to know is that individuals who basically are out of status or undocumented, they also can't leave the country, okay? Because if they do, that departure triggers the 3 or 10-year bar, okay? There is a very specific INA regulation, we call it the 3 and 10-year bar, which says that if you are unlawfully in the US for more than 180 days, but less than 1 year, okay, and you leave the country, you can't come back for 3 years. If you are unlawful for 1 year or more in the US, and now you leave the country, then you can't come back for 10 years, okay? And then there's also a permanent bar. Basically, if you are subject to the 10-year bar, okay, and then you try to come back to the US, now you're subject to the permanent bar, okay? There are waivers that are available. It is discretionary, but it's a long process. And again, only if you have a qualifying relative, okay? This is the problem that we have, why we have over the years, like this segment of populations was basically stuck in limbo. They can't become legal because they're out of status or undocumented. And they also can't leave the country because then they can't come back to the US. So the catch-22. Okay, next slide, please, Karen. All right, so this graphic is basically to show you a typical path or journey for somebody who is in the US trying to apply for a green card. So we have people who are inside the US, and then we have people who are outside the country. So this first series of boxes is through the family sponsorship. So let's say somebody comes in on a B2. Again, that's a tourist visa, okay? And they marry a US citizen, okay? That is going to be through the family sponsorship. And so that starts by filing an I-130, okay? Which eventually leads to an adjustment of status or green card. And once you have that green card, then eventually you're eligible to apply for naturalization. Okay, same thing, if you are in the country on, let's say, a work visa like the H-1B, okay, that typically will require an employer sponsorship for the green card. And that's done through the form I-140. And then once again, the next process would be to file for an adjustment of status or green card and then eventual naturalization. Now, if you're outside the country, waiting to enter as an immigrant, that process is going to start for you by your sponsor, whether that's a family member or an employer, filing the paperwork in the US. Okay, but once your paperwork is ready for processing, then you do consular processing at the consulate in your home country. Once that's complete, then you enter the US as a lawful permanent resident. Okay, and then at the appropriate time, you're eligible to file for naturalization. Okay. Next slide, please, Karen. Okay, so we keep talking about this green card, What is the green card? Well, if somebody wants to live and work permanently in the US, you need a green card. And it's called a green card because years ago, the card actually was on like a greenish paper and it was a paper card. It wasn't even laminated. And the name just stuck. We still call it a green card. Um, but basically, the green card is somebody's permanent status in the US. Okay, you can live and work in the US, you can travel freely. Having the green card also allows you to sponsor relatives, specifically your spouse and unmarried children. You can sponsor them for green cards. Okay, if they weren't included in your own application. And then once you have a green card, typically after 5 years, you're eligible to apply for naturalization. Okay. Just keep in mind, though, that a green card is not somebody who's a citizen. Okay. A green card doesn't allow you to vote in the US. You also can't apply for certain jobs, okay, that only citizens can apply for. And also, as a green card holder, you can be deported. Okay. But getting a green card requires sponsorship. Okay, you can't just decide, hey, I want to live and work permanently. I want to apply for a green card. You're going to need sponsorship. So next slide, please, Karen. So the immigration law allows for 675,000 green cards across these various categories each year. Okay. And on top of this number, there's also no limit for green cards for immediate relatives of US citizens. So it's 675,000 plus the green cards for spouses and children and parents of US citizens. Okay, so the number is higher. And there are many different paths for green cards, and I've kind of categorized them in these four categories, and I'm going to go through this in the next slide. And I know there are some questions, and I'm going to try to address all of them. I hope that I can address most of the questions during the presentation, but if not, I certainly will. So just keep putting your questions in there. Okay, next slide, please, Karen. All right, so one pathway to getting your green card is through the diversity visa category. And it's basically like a visa lottery. It's not the H-1B lottery, in case you guys have heard that. It's different than that. This is for the green card. So each year, there are about 55,000 green cards that are randomly selected in a lottery for people from those countries that don't have a lot of immigration. Okay, so less than, I think the exact number is if you have less than 50,000 immigrants to the US in the previous 5 years from that country, then you're eligible to put your name into the visa lottery. Okay, and in order to be eligible for the lottery, an individual needs to have at least a high school education or 2 years of work experience. Okay. Then we have, this is actually not in the exact order, but refugees and asylees. Okay. So these groups of people are people that can't go back to their home country because they're fleeing, because they have a well-founded fear of persecution on account of their race, religion, sexual orientation, national origin. And so for these people, there is a pathway to become legal. If you're outside the US, you're considered a refugee. If you're inside the US, you're considered an asylee and you're applying for asylum. Okay. And each year, the president gets to set the maximum number or the ceiling of refugees that are allowed to enter the US. And unfortunately, those numbers have gone down significantly, under Trump's first administration and also for this year. Yeah, exactly. We also have under these humanitarian categories, VAWA, which is under the Violence Against Women's Act. So this allows victims of domestic violence by US citizens to self-petition for green cards. We have U visas, which are basically for victims of certain crimes who cooperate with law enforcement. So if you're in the US and maybe you're undocumented or out of status, and you are a victim of a serious crime and you help law enforcement, if law enforcement signs a certification that you're assisting them, it's possible to be approved for a U visa. Okay. The problem we're having now is that the administration is telling agencies, government agencies, state agencies not to sign these certifications. Okay. And the other problem we have with U visas is that only 10,000 U visas can be granted each year. And so there is a long list of people who are in line to get a U visa. But because there's a 10,000 limit, they're just waiting. Okay. Once you have that U visa, you are eligible to apply for a green card after 3 years. The T visa is similar to the U visa. It's for certain victims of human trafficking. It also leads to a green card. Same thing with SIJ, which is a special immigrant juvenile. Probably heard in the news over the last couple of years, unaccompanied minors who are coming to the US. Well, some of those are able to self-petition under SIJ, which eventually leads to a green card. DACA is another one, right? I'm sure you've heard of it, but DACA is basically temporary permission for you to stay in the US. And you are eligible for work authorization. And unfortunately, DACA was enacted in 2012 by President Obama through executive action. And it's been litigated, and right now there's no new DACA applications that are processed. They're only processing extensions. And I think there are approximately like 530,000 individuals that have DACA protection, but they're basically stuck. They can't get a green card. It's just like temporary status where the government allows you to stay and work, but you're not a green card holder. Okay. And that also prevents people from leaving the country because you don't have travel authorization. And then we have TPS. Okay. So TPS is temporary protected status, and that's been in the news a lot under this administration. And basically TPS is granted to people who are in the US, but they can't go back home because maybe there's a natural disaster, maybe ongoing armed conflict. But the US designates specific countries for TPS. And also they designate TPS for a particular time, which many times is extended for years and years and years because country conditions haven't improved. Under this administration, we're seeing that TPS is ending for people from Haiti, Nepal, Venezuela. And so these individuals who have been in here, been in the US for a number of years, or authorized to work, are basically going to be out of status, and we're not sure how the government is going to be handling those individuals. But TPS and DACA, it doesn't directly lead to a green card. Okay, that's why I have this dotted line on this graphic. It depends on your status. It depends on whether or not you have a pathway to become legal, whether it's like through marriage. It's typically just through marriage at this point. Okay, next slide, please. So immigrant visas under the employment-based category. So there's also a pathway to become legal through sponsorship through an employer. And there is an overall limit, which is 140,000 annual quota. And what's interesting is that this number includes dependents of the employee. It's counted towards that. So we're actually only admitting or approving green cards for a small number of employment-based green cards. But unfortunately, your dependents are counted towards this quota. So it just creates a significant backlog for a lot of the employment-based visa categories. And I'm not going to go through all of these, but basically we have, 5 employment-based preference categories. starting with EB1, which is the highest level, which gets the most number of visas that are allocated, all the way to EB5, which is the investor green card. You probably heard of, making $1 million investment to get a green card. Well, that falls under EB5. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay. So family sponsorship is the most common path to the green card. And there is a complicated system for calculating how many green cards are approved each year. But bottom line is we start with 480. And then at the low end, the minimum number is 226,000. Okay, so it's somewhere in between. And the calculation is based on how many cases were filed the previous year, how many unused visa numbers are allocated in certain categories. But in any event, this is the breakdown of the different categories that are eligible for family sponsorship. The first one is immediate relative, which has no limit. So if you are a US citizen and you want to sponsor a spouse, or you want to sponsor your unmarried children, or your parents even who are back home, you can sponsor them. They are considered immediate relatives, and there's no cap on how many approvals immigration can give each year. Okay. Everybody else falls under this family preference. And for each category, there's limitations. Okay. And so only people who are US citizens or green card holders, which is LPR, are eligible to sponsor in the employment-based category. And depending on your relationship, determines what preference category you fall under. So let's say as a US citizen, you want to sponsor your sister who's back in your home country. Okay, that's under the F4 preference category. Okay, you cannot sponsor your cousin. You can't sponsor an aunt. You can't sponsor a grandparent. Okay, there are very limited family relationships that are recognized for immigration. It's basically a spouse, children, okay, and brothers and sisters, and parent, okay? But only parents of US citizens are eligible for sponsorship. Okay, so it is complicated, but I just wanted to put this, this chart or table for you so you can see how these different categories are allocated for green cards. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so in addition to these quotas that we have on the various immigration preference categories, whether it's family, employment, there's also a limit on how many immigrants can come to the US from any one country. So no group of permanent immigrants from a single country can exceed 7% of the total number of green cards. Okay, so that's what we call the per country cap. So in addition to brothers and sisters or employment-based first, second, and third categories, there's also a 7% cap, per country cap. So that's what creates these significant backlogs, okay? And the backlogs, okay, are processed through what we call priority dates. When you start a petition process, whether it's through your family by doing an I-130 or through employment by doing an I-140, that determines your priority date, okay? And a lot of countries are oversubscribed. So let's see how long it takes to get a green card. We're going to talk about that in the next two slides. Karen? Okay. So how long will it take to sponsor my relative? Well, if you are an immediate relative of a citizen, so again, you are a spouse of a US citizen, a parent of a US citizen, or an unmarried child under 21, then there's no visa quota, okay? So there's no backlog. It just depends on how quickly immigration processes the paperwork. Right now, it's taking about 1.5 to 2 years, okay? Under the family preference category, okay? How long it takes to immigrate or get your green card depends on the visa availability, and most countries are backlogged. We have to check the visa bulletin as to how long it's going to take. So Karen, can we go to the next slide, please? So I wanted to show you this because this is a calculation we did a couple months ago, but it's still, I would say, 99% accurate, even though this the visa bulletin and the dates are more than a year old. So if you are filing, okay, for your adult, unmarried child as a US citizen, that's under the F1 category, okay? You're going to be waiting 9 years, okay, before you can get that green card. Now, if you happen to be born in Mexico, if your relative is born in Mexico, okay, now we're talking about that same category taking 20 years before you can immigrate your unmarried child. Okay, now if your child marries, that's too late. Okay, now they fall out of this category, and now, you know, they no longer may be eligible. If you are a green card holder and you want to sponsor your spouse, okay, that's under the F2A, and it's taking 3 to 4 years. Okay, but if your spouse is born in Mexico, we're talking about 19 years. Because again, there is a quota and there is a 7% cap per country cap. So we're talking a really, really, really long time for some of these categories. Okay, now, if they are in the US, the problem is that they're not going to be able to get their green card unless they maintain their status. And, you know, it's impossible to maintain your status if we're looking at, you know, 19 years. Okay, so that's why we have this segment of the population that basically maybe fell out of status. There may be a pass, but realistically, it's impossible. Okay, next slide, please. So the visa bulletin is basically a publication by the Department of State, and that indicates when you're able to apply for a green card, okay? When your priority date is current. Next slide, please, Karen. So every month they publish this bulletin and they tell us, okay, well, if you are under the F2A category for the month of October, okay, this is what we are processing under the family green card category. And now you can see if you are from these oversubscribed categories like China, India, Mexico, or Philippines, the wait time is even longer. Okay, so every month we get this bulletin and we have to check the bulletin and we have to check our clients' cases to see who is going to be eligible for a green card. So we monitor this on a regular basis. Okay, next slide, please, Karen. Okay, now I'm going to go over the typical path for a green card, because most people that are maybe out of status or undocumented that are filing for a green card, it's going to be through the family sponsorship category. And that starts with filing this relative petition with the Immigration Service. Okay, filing this petition determines your priority date. So if I'm filing this petition, let's say today, which is September 18, 2025, that establishes the priority date. Okay, and then each month we follow the visa bulletin to see, are they working on my priority date for me to actually get my green card? Okay, the processing time for these relative petitions, it varies depending on the category. If you're filing for a sibling, we know that wait is going to be 20 years or more. So they're not going to be, processing those cases for years to come. Okay. Once this relative petition is approved, basically as an immediate relative, you can file for the green card right away. Okay. So what I want to mention here is that the current laws do allow for people who are out of status to file for a green card if they're married to a US citizen, as long as they can show that they entered the country legally. Okay, so again, if you entered the US on a tourist visa and you never left the country, okay? And you're married to a US citizen, you're eligible to apply for a green card. Okay, now, you have to make sure though, if if you were married in your home country, that marriage needs to be terminated first before, of course, you can marry the US citizen. Okay, you don't have to go back to your home country to get a divorce. Okay, you can file for divorce in the US based on, where you live, but you have to terminate all marriages before you can marry the US citizen spouse. And then the spouse is able to sponsor you for the green card. Okay, if you're in the US, which most people will be, you're going to be applying for an adjustment of status. And all types of family sponsorship cases, they do require an affidavit of support. And I'm going to talk about that in the next slide because we're going to see a lot of this public charge issue come up, under this administration, like we did previously. Okay, the immigration laws say that when you sponsor your relative, you as a petitioner and sponsor, you have to ensure that your relative will not become a public charge on the federal government, which makes sense. Absolutely. We don't want people who are immigrating to the US to rely on, our government and federal benefits. So that totally makes sense. But what they're doing is they're creating additional hurdles for people to disqualify them. Okay. And the next slide, I think, talks about the affidavit of support. But before you can get the green card, your relative also has to complete a medical exam, make sure that they don't have any type of communicable diseases, because of course we want to make sure that we protect the public, right? You'll be fingerprinted, and again, all of your, if you have any type of criminal issue, of course, that's going to be a problem. And then finally, before you can get your green card, there is an immigrant visa interview. And at that time, if it's based on marriage, they're going to go over joint documents to prove that it's a legitimate relationship. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so this is a public charge issue. So again, when you sponsor somebody, you have to agree that you're going to support them. Basically, you're signing a contract with the federal government. That's what this form I-864 is, which says that, you agree to sponsor this individual and be financially responsible. And if your relative obtains any government benefits they're not entitled to, the government can go after you to, for those benefits. Okay, so as a sponsor, you have to provide tax returns, your W-2 income, your pay slips, and you have to meet the federal poverty guidelines. Okay, and if you don't meet the federal poverty guidelines, you can't have a joint sponsor that can join you in this process. Okay, because depending on the number of people in your household, you may not be able to meet the guidelines. So, for example, if you are sponsoring, let's say, your sibling, and with your sibling, their spouse is able to immigrate. Their children under 21 can immigrate. So now we're talking about your sibling plus their spouse, and let's say 3 children. So we're talking about 5 people. All right. And then if you have 4 people in your own household, now we're talking about 9 people. All right. So that's the income threshold that you have to show. Okay. And one thing I want to mention here is that if you sign as a petitioner that you're going to be the financial sponsor, that obligation continues even if you get divorced from that person. Okay, so it's important that the US citizen spouse, before they undertake this process, that they're aware of this. Okay, next slide, please, Karen. And so these are the federal poverty guidelines. Again, you have to show that you meet the third column, which is the 125% of the poverty guidelines, based on the number of people in your household. Okay, so it's not excessive, but nevertheless, again, depending on how many people are counted, it could be high. Okay. All right. Next slide, please. bona fide documents. Okay, so marriage, green card through marriage, okay, requires proving that the relationship is bona fide. So they're going to want a lot of evidence, okay? They're going to want to see pictures, joint tax returns, bank account statements that you guys are living together, utility bills, if you have children together, maybe even affidavits. This is again to show that the marriage is bona fide, that the foreign national is not, marrying somebody for the green card. Okay, so there is an interview process. You have to present these documents. And the interview process also could entail separating the spouses. Okay, that's not uncommon under this administration. Okay, next slide. Okay, so let's say you go through this whole process, you file for a marriage-based green card or a green card through asylum. Okay, and you get the green card. There are some rights and responsibilities. Okay, it's pretty straightforward. Once you have that green card, you're able to live and work in the U.S. permanently. You can own property, apply for a license, work in the federal government. As a green card holder, you also can receive Social Security, SSI, Medicare benefits, okay, but not as a non-immigrant or undocumented individual, okay? And, believe it or not, they are not applying for these benefits. In fact, people who don't have status or are undocumented and have U.S. citizen children who may be entitled to benefits, they still don't apply for any benefits for their children because they're afraid that, they might get into trouble, okay? When the children are entitled to the benefits. As a green card holder, you're also eligible for naturalization and you can sponsor certain relatives. It's important that when you have a green card that you maintain your status, that you have to permanently live in the US. We have a lot of people who have their green card and then travel outside the country for long periods of time. And that jeopardizes your green card status, okay? You could be considered to have abandoned your green card if you do that, okay? So you have to be really careful about that. Next slide, please. Okay, once you have the green card, okay, that's what it looks like. Now you are a lawful permanent resident, and now you're eligible for naturalization after 5 years of being a green card holder or 3 years if you are married and living with your spouse. Okay, it's actually with your U.S. citizen spouse, not LPR spouse. So Karen, we'll have to make that correction on slide number 27. And why do people apply for naturalization? Well, very quickly, because you can vote, serve on juries, change your name. You don't have to renew your green card anymore. Okay, you can also be eligible for federal grants if you're going to school. Next slide. And just quickly, I'm going to go through this, but I think it's next week when we have our naturalization program, we'll do like an in-depth immigration naturalization process. But basically, you have to be at least 18 years old. You need a green card for at least 5 years, and you have to be physically and continuously residing in the U.S. You have to be a person of good moral character. You have to be able to speak, read, and write basic English. Okay. There's also a test, and the test is going to be changing soon. So stay tuned for that. And also, if you are a male living in the U.S. between 18 or 26 years old, you have to register for selective service. Okay, so that's basically the overview of the naturalization process. So I think we might be coming to an end. Karen? Okay, great. So I know there were maybe not, okay, not a lot of questions. So that's good.